going to speak from the Competent Communication Manual, and this it is the How to Say It speech. The title of the speech is Death and What We Do With It. Please help me welcome Reed Wally.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters, thank you, and honored guests, thank you for coming from Germany. My speech this evening is going to be about death and what we do with it. My Aunt Dorothy died last year on October 6th, and it was an amazing and beautiful experience. And to back up a little bit, my father had called and said that our Aunt Dorothy was going to die in about 2 weeks, according to the doctors. And so I didn't really know what to do with death. I didn't know how to experience it. So I decided instead I was going to embrace everything that was going to happen. I wasn't going to be afraid of anything. For me, two things came out of that idea. Number one, I was going to physically touch my aunt because she was given about 2 weeks and she was in a bed. And she was on pain medication on hospice. Because nobody touches the dying. I was going to stroke her hair, rub her arm, hold her hand. And number two, I decided I was going to smile at my aunt. Because nobody smiles at the dying. And in fact, my aunt probably was never going to see another smile for the rest of her life, for the remaining 2 weeks. I was going to smile. In room 126, my Aunt Dorothy was crammed in the middle of two patients, one on the left and one on the right. And there was television sports blaring out of the patient's TV from the left, and there was news sports screaming out of the TV from the patient on the right. And there was this bombardment of ugly sound. It sounded like a football game Monday night at the sports bar. As soon as I got to my aunt's bed, I noticed there were thin, blue cotton curtains dividing the room between the two beds. And as soon as I saw my aunt, I looked right in her face with a big smile, and my aunt looked like a Holocaust victim. Her face was distorted, and her mouth was held open at a weird angle, and her tongue was sticking out. Her skin was semi-see-through and pale, and her bones were sticking through her skin, and it looked like her skin was too small for her skeleton. I kneeled to this right side of her bed, and I stroked her hair, and I rubbed her arm, and I held her hand, and her skin felt warm and dry like rubbery paper. She was comatose, so I had to lean forward and whisper in her ear, "We're all here, Dorothy. Reed, Lance, your sister, my dad." The next day I made sure to go to her apartment and find some classical music so that we could cut through the television war zone that was happening in her bed, in her hospital bed. I found 2 cassette tapes. And they were still in the tape decks, and that's how you know somebody likes music, when the cassettes are still in the tape decks, and they've been in the hospital for 2 weeks. I dusted off 2 portable cassette players that I found, and I found the first cassette tape, which was opera, which is her favorite tape. And I smacked it into the cassette player, and it played, and then it warbled, and then it whopped, and then it crinkled. Oh! And I opened up the cassette tape, and I pulled it out, and it was in the shape of an accordion, and it was broken in half. Damn it! I had just broken my aunt's favorite cassette tape, and she was dying. So I found the second tape player and the second tape, and I put it in, and it worked. Classical cello. Back to the hospital we went. We entered the room at exactly 7:15 that night. We had 45 minutes left until they closed visiting hours. This time she was awake, but her eyes were closed. And she kept clearing her throat, and the nurses said, her lungs are filling up with fluid, and she can't breathe easily, so she keeps having to clear her throat. And Dorothy kept jerking her right leg and jerking her right arm, trying to get the bed sheets off of her because she was obviously too hot. She looked like a broken scarecrow, agitated, out of control. Again, I got next to her and stroked her hair and rubbed her arm and held her hand. And this time her skin felt clammy and warm and salty. And her breath, my aunt's dying breath, was so rotten that I almost vomited twice. And I kept smiling. And I noticed there was a stain at the bottom of her sheets right below her right heel. And the nurses said that she was retaining so much water that she was actually leaking through her skin. I kept smiling. My brother put on the classical cassette and turned it up really loud so we could battle through the field of television noise that was happening on either side. So we had the classical music and the TV sports, and we had the news channel all going at once. Dorothy was still hacking up phlegm, and the nurses had to come in with a big suction tube and jam it down her throat and suck out the phlegm out of the back of her mouth. This is what death looked like, minute by minute. My mom stood close to my aunt, to her sister, right up to her face, and started singing opera songs along with the classical music. And I noticed around song number 4 that my aunt was completely still. Her arms were down by her sides. She was no longer agitated. She was no longer coughing, and she was no longer jerking her arms and her legs around. Completely still. It was amazing. It was beautiful. I leaned close to Dorothy and said, "We'll see you tomorrow." And we left. It was 8 o'clock. Time to go. Dorothy died 12 hours later, and my mom commented, "My sister always was an early morning person." The classical music, my mom's opera singing, my physically touching my aunt and rubbing her hair and holding her hand and rubbing her arm, feeling her physically, my smiling, it made it all amazingly beautiful. 2 days later, after we came back from Long Beach, I ran into my friend Brandon Greathouse, and I told him about my amazing experience with my aunt's death. And 3 weeks later, his grandfather died. And Brandon had a chance to say goodbye the same way I had a chance to say goodbye. And Brandon related that when he walked into the room to say goodbye to his grandfather who was dying, he was scared to death, and he stood against the wall. And then he remembered what I had said about embracing the experience. And he walked up to his grandfather and held his hand, and he smiled, and they both cried, and they both got a chance to say goodbye in a beautiful way. And to wrap up, I wasn't scared of my aunt's dying because I had embraced everything from the beginning. I physically touched my aunt because nobody touches the dying. I stroked her hair and I rubbed her arm and I held her hand, and I smiled at my aunt because nobody smiles at the dying. And it gave Brandon a chance to do the same with his grandfather.